Hi, welcome everyone to our webinar today. My name is Anna, and next to me there's today's guest, Abraham Shevack. We're happy that you're here, Abraham. And within the next 45 minutes, we want to talk about medical writing. And what can you expect from our webinar? You can see it in a little bit. So we want to talk a little bit about what medical writing actually is and why it is important. You will learn more about where medical writers actually work. You know, is it just big companies or there are also other places? We will talk about what skills and qualifications you need and what skills and qualifications you might also be able to learn on the job. We will compare positive and negative aspects when it comes to working in industry, especially in the field of medical writing. And you will learn more about the European Medical Writers Association, or abbreviated EMWA, because this association provides really helpful resources for you if you're interested in launching a career in medical writing. So you can ask questions whenever you want to. You just write them in the chat, and we have our two colleagues here, Marika and Jessica, and they will collect all the questions for you. And then probably at the end, we will have a time slot to answer your questions. If there's something that's particularly urgent or like you don't understand anything, we will see that and we try to answer it immediately. All right. So we want to talk about medical writing, careers in medical writing. Therefore, of course, we invited someone who knows about that. And Abe, you've been in medical writing for a long time, almost 25 years. Is that right? Yeah. And you're now a freelancer, but you used to work at big companies. Before that as a senior scientific medical writer, but you're a trained biologist. So
that's right.
A scientist by training.
That's right. Like many medical writers with a science background, worked at the Max Planck Institute for Molecular Genetics in Berlin for a number of years. Had the good fortune to work with a Nobel Prize winner at a Ionat in 2009. So it was a very great time to work and research in those years. But at some point, I decided to move into industry, and I continued to work into research then. And after some years working in basic research at Schering in Berlin, I overheard a conversation in the fitness room in pedaling on my bike, and hearing two colleagues there talking about medical writing. Oh, what's that? It sounds quite interesting. And talking with him, I got even more interested and found that it was a good opportunity to apply my interest in science and in writing to a new career. So I applied for a job within the company and transitioned out of research into an office where I was involved in clinical development.
Very interesting, and we will hear more about like what that is like today. And you're also involved in EMWA. This is why we will also hear a little bit more about the association and what or how it can help researchers and scientists.
Sure.
All right, so you guys, you already know what we want to talk about. So we start with the most crucial question, Abe. What is medical writing?
Well, medical writing covers a lot of areas. So it's basically about communicating science and clinical data, okay, to a wide range of audiences. It's very diverse. There's very different types of documents that you're involved in writing. And it's basically broken down into regulatory writing and medical communications.
Yeah, and we talk a little bit more about these two options. So I've never heard about regulatory writing. So what is that actually?
Oh, it's a very formal type of writing. There are requirements from pharmaceutical companies, right? So you are involved in writing documents that pharmaceutical companies need to get a license to market their drugs.
All right.
Okay, so it's geared, so your primary audience in this case are the regulatory authorities. And there are a wide range of documents. They're all sort of standardized, and they are set out by regulatory guidelines. And different companies have different templates to write these documents. They consist of, for instance, investigators' brochures, clinical trial protocols, clinical study reports, documents for submission to the health authorities for drug registration. And maybe if I can give just two examples, what is a clinical trial protocol and what is a clinical study report, because they're pretty core documents. So a clinical trial protocol sets out the blueprint, basically how to run a clinical study. So probably many of you know a clinical study is a trial with human subjects where a new drug or therapy or diagnostic procedure is tried out under very strict conditions, okay? And these conditions are set out in the trial protocol. There are different phases of it. And the importance of this document is that these studies are carried out in many countries, in big companies at the same time, in many countries, dozens of countries probably, in dozens or even hundreds of hospitals. And all of these hospitals have a site where an investigator is in charge and he has his personnel. And everybody needs to, in all of these countries, have to synchronize their activities to do the same type of things. They have to include the same types of patients. They have to give the treatment in the same way. They have to examine the patients in the same way. They have to collect data in the same way. And all of this is set out in the clinical trial protocol.
It's a very important document.
Yeah, it's basically central to do these very large studies in multiple countries. Okay, and when the study is over, okay, after a year or two when it's over, you have to report the results of these studies. So you have a huge database that's collected from these hundreds of patients, and this database has to be cleaned and it has to be closed down, and then statisticians come into play. The statisticians start to grind out tables, graphs, listings, hundreds and thousands of pages, okay? And the medical writer gets this output basically, all right? And you have to have a standard template to write a clinical study report, and you have to interpret these the results of these studies in a clinical study report. Okay, and unlike a manuscript for publication, a clinical study report can be hundreds of pages with thousands of pages of appendices. So it's a huge document, has to be electronically linked so it's easy to navigate, and it's the bread and butter document of medical writers.
Okay, so regulatory writing, very important. We already got one question that directly refers to that. Is there no regulatory writing in clinical research organizations?
Oh yes, there's definitely in clinical research, or we can also call them CROs as an abbreviation. Yes, they are very well known. These are service organizations that work with pharmaceutical companies. They are insourced to take over certain duties or functions that a pharmaceutical company may need to do, and this may include medical writing as well.
Okay, so we will talk about this a little later because we will actually check where do medical writers work and what kind of organizations are out there. But there's not just regulatory writing, there's another field that seems almost a little bit broader, that is medical communications.
Right.
What is that? What's medical communications?
So you have a different audience here. So medical communications quite often takes place after a drug comes on the market. So, and pharmaceutical companies want to spread the word
All right.
about this new drug, especially to healthcare professionals, so doctors, nurses, also to patients and their families, to journalists as well, so that they can spread the word. And medical writers are involved in preparing manuscripts for publication based on these pivotal studies. Doctors are going to medical conferences. So medical writers are preparing slide sets, posters, abstracts, educational material, monographs. It's all based to explain what the new treatment is all about and get the word out there. And it keeps medical writers in medcoms agencies quite busy. So medcoms agencies have a different specialty. Sometimes pharmaceutical companies actually hire them to write their publications for them, because they really crank these things out, and they have a lot of expertise, specifically in publications, specifically in going to conferences and preparing all these types of materials.
Okay, so that's a little bit more colorful, it sounds like, right? Yeah. So it's a form of science communication in a way, right? Yes. That is very diverse. Right. I can see.
Very diverse and perhaps somewhat more creative.
A little bit, it sounds like it at least. Okay, we already talked about these medcom agencies and about CROs and big pharmaceutical companies, but there are also other places where you can work, also depending a little bit on the kind of medical writing. Right. So I see here on the slide set also organizations or forms of communication like journal publishing, right, or what do we have? Charities, even the medical device sector. Can you talk a little bit more about the range of organizations that offer jobs for medical writers?
Yeah, well, for instance, medical devices, the regulations have changed, and this has sort of opened up the field of writing about medical devices. It's similar. Some medical writers who have been involved in drug development, writing about drugs, have started to learn more and more about medical device writing. There are different types of reports, because it's very highly technical, not only writing about biological things, but writing specifically about how machinery, how software works, technical specifications. And they're not called clinical study reports, they're called clinical evaluation reports, for instance. People in journal publishing may be working as editors in journal publishing organizations. We talked about the CROs, or contract research organizations. So they handle an awful lot of writing for pharmaceutical companies as needed. Biotechnology sector as well. There are biotech companies that are developing drugs that need writers to prepare various types of documents. So it's very spread out. You might work, for instance, I had an acquaintance. He was working at the Max Delbruck Center. It's a research center, and he was doing public relations writing.
Ah, okay.
For them as well, and he teaches science writing to researchers.
Ah, that's another field. You can also go into education.
Yeah, that's as well, into education. There are also people coming from translations. They're they're translating these quite technical clinical documents as well into different languages. People coming from translation, they quite often, they are good writers, but they need to learn the science, but that you can learn as well.
So I guess from what we were talking about so far, it's probably quite hard to say what the day or a day of a medical writer usually looks like, right? It can be very diverse.
Very diverse.
But is it basically like a lot of meetings, or a lot of like writing on your own, or is it also teamwork? What's that like?
It's all of those things. The example that I understand best is perhaps working in a pharmaceutical company. Okay, so you may have multiple projects going on at the same time in different phases of preparation, right? So I might be writing my a clinical study report, and I've sent it out for review, and I've gotten review comments from diverse people, 10 or 15 different reviewers. So I am working on the review. I may have to call a meeting in order, when going through the comments, if there are any open issues with respect to the comments, which will affect the other members of the group. So maybe there's something open that has to be discussed. I may be planning meetings, for instance, to write a clinical study protocol. I write an agenda, and I invite people from a multifunctional background who are on the team, statisticians, clinicians, pharmacologists, pharmacokineticists. We're either online with each other or we meet face to face, and we plan how we're going to go about writing a specific document. Quite often, medical writers are the owners of these documents in terms of the process. So they may be outranked by the people that they're working with, but in the process of writing these type of documents, they are getting things organized, helping to make a granular time plan and organize the responsibilities that people have.
So that already sounds like you need a lot more skills than just being a good writer, and we will talk about this in a moment. But we also got another question here. Is medical communication always in English? Or in Germany, for example, is it in German? Yeah, we will talk about this with the skills and qualification, but maybe you can answer it right now.
Well, yeah. Well, English seems to be an international language, but I'm sure that there are websites where you need to communicate in German, especially patient advocacy groups in Germany, or just general information about new drugs. I'm sure there are also German sites for specific drugs.
Yeah, also for doctors
and for doctors as well. So you. It does not necessarily always have to be in English. There is quite a lot in English, though, I think.
Yeah. So the regulatory writing, because it's usually an international affair, it's usually, I guess, then in English. Or if you have to communicate, like let's say with a German office or like a German area, might also be in German, parts of it.
Right. Well, in my experience, I mean, I was communicating all day in German, sometimes in English, but I was writing in English. But since you are in regulatory applying to agencies like the European Medicines Agency or the Food and Drug Administration, you need to write in English.
Okay,
so, good English skills are quite important.
Okay, so we will come back to the skills in a little bit. Let me check if there's another question. Okay, we will. We got two more questions, but we will answer them when we go to the skills, because there's one more question that you're certainly very interested in. It's how much can you earn in medical writing? Can you give us like a range a little bit?
I mean, there is quite a large range. So EMWA, the European Medical Writers Association, did a salary survey in 2017, and it's published in the Medical Writing Journal. So mean annual income around 62K. Okay, but there's a standard deviation of around 28. Okay. So large standard deviation. I have a range here of something between 16 and 210. So that's probably management.
Yeah.
There's medical writing management. It's quite well paid. So you're in charge of an entire medical writing department. Okay. And with little experience, less than 2 years experience, it's around 45K.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, that's a good number. It's always good to know at least numbers, right?
Yeah, sure.
So let's see if we're interested in medical writing. What I got so far is, of course, you have to have like some sort of sense for writing, but especially when working in a company or at an agency or whatever, you always also have to deal with other people, right?
Right.
And there's a whole a whole another world around that. So what would you say, besides the writing expertise, we already talked about the language, what else is important to be a good medical writer or to become a good medical writer?
Well, you need good organizational skills. I think planning is almost as important as the writing. So be able to manage your time well, be very well organized, um, uh, being able to organize others. So sometimes, you need to be a team player and just sort of follow along, and uh, and sometimes you need to sort of take charge. So you have to be willing to be able to step in and do that. Some people who you work with might be more experienced, some people might be less experienced. So you can definitely add something to the planning of writing all of these documents because you've seen some things and you know some of the pitfalls. So you can make them aware of these things. At the same time, you need to be flexible, okay, as well. I mean, so you need to know these document structures very well. Okay, the format of all of these documents. You need to be up to date on the guidelines because they're changing quite often. So that's important to keep abreast of all of the changes that are going on. It's very helpful to have a scientific background. At the graduate level, about 70% of EMWA members do have a PhD. It's not necessarily a requirement, but it's certainly very, very helpful to have a PhD. You need basically a good understanding of human biology and disease treatments. And you will learn a lot as a medical writer. You learn a lot about the different diseases and the different treatments through your work.
Okay, so this is something on the job, like you don't have to know all of this.
You don't necessarily have to be conversant in oncology, in different cancers or different cardiovascular diseases. You learn quite a lot. And that is really this ability to learn, is very transferable because if you've studied to the PhD level, you know how to learn, you know how, and gathering information that you need, learning what you need to have in order to write something, knowing where to get it, knowing what questions to ask to who, in order to go further with writing the job. So it's kind of a lot of communication in addition to the writing and the planning. So knowing how long something is going to take to do, because you have to do some negotiation, because people on teams are pushing to get things done very quickly, but they might be sacrificing quality at the same time. But you as a medical writer, you'll know, you give them a very granular plan, you see what responsibilities are, you show them how long things can take, and they will be convinced and support you.
So you can actually learn quite a bit on the job when you have a good way of communicating, for instance, at a job interview, that you're self-organized, that you can communicate well, work with others, and so on.
Yeah, and having good analytical skills.
Yeah, basically everything that a PhD also needs, like during their PhD studies, right? Basically like figuring out where to get information, analyzing it, structuring it in a nice way. So it's a good transferable skill set.
That's right. And you're used to speaking, giving talks.
Yeah.
So you need to talk in front of groups of multifunctional professionals, getting your point across, communicating effectively.
Perfect. We do have two more questions. How many people will be involved in one project or one document? Is it usually like you're just like one person in a project, or do you have a team, or how does it usually work?
Well, in terms of regulatory writing on big studies, like a big study would be like a phase 3 study, which maybe have hundreds of patients, up to 1,000 patients, and you'll have you may have more people involved, you know, so you may have a clinician, statistician, a data manager, I mentioned pharmacokineticists, pharmacologists, people experts in logistics of delivering drugs. So lots and lots of people involved, study managers as well, people, clinical research assistants. So you will have, for instance, in writing a protocol, you may have a team of 15 or 20 people who need to contribute to this protocol, and they need to review it, okay? So that's a possibility. Other projects, you may have a smaller number of people. So, you know, if it's a smaller study, and so you may have a few people working on this project. Some projects, if you go to a submission level, you'll be working with other medical writers. You might be working with 3 or 4 medical writers. So, for instance, I worked on a submission that was on multiple continents. So we were submitting in Japan, the United States, and in Europe, and there were 3 medical writers in each of those areas, and so we had to coordinate all our activities together. So it's quite interesting.
So it's often a group effort, so to say.
It's quite often a group effort. You're not sitting by yourself, but there's enough solitary time as well, and you need it.
Are there projects where you completely have just like your own project, like a, I don't know, translation or PR thing where it's just you, or is it usually, it's more common that you work with others?
Yeah, it can be, again, you might be writing a manuscript, okay, and you might be just working with one clinician, okay? And he may give you all the literature that you need, and basically he knows what journal he's going to submit to, so you read all the specifications and the layout specification for the journal, and you might be working just with him and a statistician. Okay, so that'll be a small group, and it's fairly easy. I've written things like standard operating procedures, and okay, that's not the most fascinating work, but that's also a lot of solitary time, and maybe just conferring with a project manager occasionally. So it varies depending on you know, the size of the study and how large the undertaking is going to be.
All right. Okay. So let's say now I say, well, that sounds very interesting. I'm interested in learning more about becoming a medical writer. How do I, or where do I start? Like, let's say I'm in academia right now, and I think, ooh, that sounds rather interesting. How do I start? And we collected a few examples, right? So these are all people you know, or know through someone, and they all had a similar background, all were postdocs at a university or research institution, and then they transitioned into medical writing, also in different fields of medical writing. So is there like one good way or something that you would say is helpful when you want to take this first step from academia to medical writing?
Well, in general, I think the first step is actually knowing that medical writing exists as a profession. So many people don't know about it, okay? And once you know about it, your curiosity will take you, you know, to doing searches and to start reading about it, reading about the different areas of medical writing, knowing what it's about, knowing what it's involved in. Perhaps if being interested enough, you can take training courses. There are online training courses. There are contract research organizations, for instance, like Parexel or other ones. They have training courses that they offer as well. So to learn certain aspects about the job, and you become more conversant in the field. So you start to know what you're talking about. Okay. There's also networking is quite important, like in many other areas. Joining perhaps a networking organization. right? For instance, Jennifer joined the American Medical Writers Association.
Not the European one,
Not
the American. I think here it says the European one, but it's the American. There's also an American one.
There's also an American. Yeah, that's an interesting story. The European Medical Writers Association used to be a chapter of the American Medical Writers Association.
Okay, I see.
Okay, and so she's an American, and she volunteered, for instance, to work on their journal. They also have a journal.
Mm-hmm.
We have a journal too, and she volunteered to work as an editor to get experience to do editing. And this looks very good on your CV, for instance. Right. So, for instance, Samsuvo also he worked. He was in the at
EMWA.
Right. He was at the University of Marburg.
Yeah.
He was a researcher. He was writing papers. He was going to conferences. He was mentoring people in the lab as well. And he really liked writing anyway. And at some point, he came to an EMWA meeting, and he right away joined in and volunteered. So he participated in the news blast. He started contributing articles to the journal about his experience being a new writer and what he's been doing up to now. And I think one of the last things he did, he actually guest edited an entire issue of the journal.
Wow. Okay, yeah.
Okay, so he was collecting articles and preparing them for publication. So this looks really good, and he, through doing that, and through the networking, he eventually landed the job that he found now. And this is the same for Sanjuka. She attended an all-day training session that I gave with a colleague at the Biotech Network in Munich. Okay, so we did some training there, and she happened to have been there. And she got really interested in medical writing. She had never heard about it before, and decided to come to an EMWA meeting and take workshops as well.
So medical writers are sometimes also present at scientific conferences. So if you're interested, you can find them even at scientific conferences. Medical writers, like let's say they're, I don't know, they're for, I don't know, publication reasons, or they have like they're interested to stay up to date, or
Well, it can be that so it's some companies. If you, as a medical writer, for instance, specialize in specific areas, like for instance, if you're very interested in oncology or in cancer areas, there are conferences like ASCO or the ones, and your supervisor may suggest, well, why don't you go to this conference, to find out more about this, for instance, about liver cancer or something like that. And this, since you're going to be working in this field, it certainly helps you to be to write better and be more conversive about this type of thing. So going to conferences is definitely, enriches your training.
What is also interesting about Jennifer, and there's a question here in that area as well, Jennifer is not like a life sciences person, right? She has a dual degree in English and business. So you can even transition with a background like this, being a very good writer. Maybe she sounds like she's a really good writer. You can then sort of learn certain things maybe prior or at your first job in order to do medical writing jobs.
Sure. Yeah. Sure. I mean, there are people who come from the humanities background, but they're good writers, and they are talented enough to learn completely different things. They can learn the science, right? There are scientists also who can't write. Not every scientist can write just because they studied science. So so there are quite a lot of good very positive stories. Some very good medical writers come from a non-science background.
Okay, I think this almost answers this question. I'm rather linguistic, creative, medical than mathematical. I don't think that might be a problem. He or she says, I find statistics scary. is there still hope?
Yeah.
But it sounds like because there's so many different fields in medical writing,
Yeah.
you can sort of find your niche, right?
You can find your niche, yeah. The regulatory writing does involve describing statistics, but a lot of statisticians I know are nice people, and you can learn a lot. And also you can take training courses in statistics, so you can learn what you need to learn. You don't have to be a statistician, but you can learn what you need to learn.
Perfect. Okay, then we do have another rather specific question. What is the role of medical writers in medical marketing? Is that right?
Medical
Marketing a drug, like to market, maybe a marketed drug?
Okay. Well, that's sort of what I was referring to. So this clinical development process, what I was talking about was our sort of pre-approval documents. Okay, needing to write these study reports, needing to summarize these study reports into other documents to prepare, for instance, a common technical document, which is a large collection of documents that the health authorities submit. You have to submit to the health authorities. They, in turn, evaluate all of this data and judge whether the sponsor has a good argument in terms of the efficacy and the safety of this product. And they will grant a product marketing license.
I see.
And then at that point, the company is able to market their drug. So you're participating in getting the drug approved so it can be marketed.
I see. And I guess there are opportunities in Germany. That's the second question. Is there such an opportunity in Germany?
Sure, there are plenty of pharmaceutical companies in Germany. Boehringer Ingelheim, the big players. There are a lot of also smaller pharmaceutical companies, mid-sized companies all over Germany. Some of my clients are smaller German companies, smaller, meaning 1,500 employees. It's still pretty big. Biotech companies as well in Germany.
How do you find these companies? Is there like a list of companies that you can look through? Like if I go to the EMWA website, will I find like a list of companies, or how do I identify these companies?
Well, there are, for instance, there are job listings on the EMWA website. Some companies are
so you can see it there,
advertising there, for instance. At our conferences, there are also recruiters for medcoms agencies. There are other networking agencies where you can find out about jobs, for instance, Medfarm Network. Okay, there's a gentleman, Peter Llewellyn, who publishes this newsletter twice a month, and you can find out about training, you can find about jobs, you can find out about a lot of things in terms of the medcoms area.
Perfect.
Right. So networking, you can find out about a lot of jobs.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting question. Can you give some examples or one examples of technical writing, and is it possible to transition from technical to medical writing?
Yeah, well, I suppose the attention to detail that you give to technical writing and presenting things in a logical order, and in terms of, I think you need some analytical thinking as well. So it should be entirely possible. You need to make things understandable. For instance, as a technical writer, and I think that you can transition these skills to medical writing.
Yeah, it's probably also then a matter of networking, like maybe meeting a different kind of subgroup.
That's right. Yeah. So, for instance, there are medical writing group LinkedIn sites or on Facebook, so you can reach out to find these people. For instance, EMWA also has discussion groups where you can find out and participate.
On LinkedIn?
Yes, on LinkedIn, for instance, also on Facebook, also on Twitter. And going to these meetings and networking with people, you really do find out a lot about what's going on because people are really good at exchanging information with each other.
Yeah.
They're very open, and medical writers like to talk a lot.
Very good.
They like to share.
Before we talk a little bit more about what EMWA can specifically contribute to networking, to maybe trainings, we just quickly want to talk about the pros and cons. So transitioning from academia to industry, no matter what job or position it is, it's always a change, it's always a transition. What would you say, what kind of person would enjoy medical writing and this transition?
People interested in a challenging work environment, applying the skills that they were able to get while they were working in research to something new, to contribute to perhaps developing new treatment, a new drug on the market. It's well paid, if you
better than academia.
It's more secure.
More secure, yeah.
That's one thing than working in academia. There's also possibilities for advancement as well. You get a lot of exposure to different areas. Some people transition out of medical writing and go to other areas within companies as well. So people who are open and flexible and who like to learn new things, because this is a very important thing. You always have to learn new things. Sometimes under time pressure, it can be difficult. But if you enjoy, even experienced writers, and suddenly, you're working suddenly in immunology. Okay, I don't know anything about immunology, and I have to write a paper about immunology. 15 publications to read. Okay, and you get into it, and you really learn something new. And then after about a week or two, okay, you could start sounding like you know what you're talking about. You become kind of an expert in the short term. So this is exciting, and maybe if you work a little bit long in a specific field, you get to be a kind of an expert in a specific area, right? So, and you have this opportunity to take a lead role in preparing these documents and working with as part of a team, right? Leading people.
So this is something you also have to enjoy, like to work with people, like to have certain pressures as well, dealing with people's stuff,
Right. Yeah, soft skills are important. There is, because of this time pressure, people can become difficult. Okay. I mean, as we probably all know, and maintaining a professional environment on the job is important for getting the job done. You have to also be able to take criticism as well. So people are commenting on your documents, right? And it might not always be flattering. So you need to choose your battles. You go along with things as they are reasonable, but sometimes you have to stay with your guns and argue from your point of view. So it's a kind of give and take as well. But you need to be flexible and enjoy that and be comfortable with working with people from different fields. And you bond with people. In a group like, especially if you've had a successful submission and you're working well together, it can be really great.
It's almost like in science, but a little bit different.
Right. Yeah. So instead of the big discovery in the lab, you get an approval from the FDA for a new drug, and they even wrote a complimentary note commenting how good the writing was. I've heard of that as well.
That hardly happens in science, right?
That hardly happens, right?
All right. Our last point is what EMWA can do for people. You were already mentioning, okay, there are these conferences, there are LinkedIn groups, there are Twitter groups, and you can get in contact with people who are medical writers. They're certainly open to also share their knowledge and career advice. So is there something specific coming up? I know that there is a conference next year in May.
In Prague.
Yeah.
There's, for instance, well, EMWA is basically a training organization.
Okay.
So at our spring conferences, which go on for 5 days, we offer like 80 workshops.
Mm-hmm.
So and they're like 3.5 hour workshops for foundation, so basic level and advanced levels on all areas, about all of these documents, how to write them, guidelines, specific scientific areas, statistics, and they're very hands-on workshops. So they're given by the members themselves who have experience in certain areas. So they're interactive, so you can learn a lot. Very practical tips about how to do certain things. So that is our core interest, to train people.
And you're a non-profit, so it's not like super expensive to
No,
join.
it's not like it's not super expensive, and so we offer other things for people who are very new to medical writing. We have a free session on getting into medical writing.
Okay.
So you have the opportunity to hear from experienced writers about their, and get coaching perhaps on how to write your CV, to adapt your CV from an academic thing to a specific medical writing position, how to handle yourself at an interview, for instance. There are also recruiters there, but that you can talk to and find out about. There's an introduction to medical writing seminar as well, and there are webinars. So that you can learn about, so as a member, you can log in. There are 1 hour webinars to learn specific things interesting to medical writers. And similar to this, you can also ask questions as well. The journal is published 4 times a year. It's a tremendous source. It's dedicated to specific themes, medical devices or pharmacovigilance, that's safety writing, lots of articles, lots of columns there. It's also online. For instance, there's also an issue of careers in medical writing, which will soon be online.
I think we can see it, careers in medical writing.
Right, yeah. This is how the journal looks. It's very high quality, and a lot of very good people work in it. Coming up, we also have at our meetings also symposia, all-day symposia. We have a symposia coming up on research integrity, okay? And especially important is a joint position statement that's coming out of EMWA in cooperation with AMWA and ISMAP, the International Society of Publication Professionals. It's about predatory journals. And then you can
like a symposia like that as a postdoc, I could just join and say I would like to attend the symposium.
Sure. Yeah, you can. It's part of the conference. It's
perfect. Okay.
So it's in the middle of the conference, and it's actually meant for people of special interest in these type of things. So in those days, some people are not going to workshops. So the workshops are sort of planned around the symposia.
Okay, perfect.
Right. So and it's a whole day thing, and usually on very hot topics that people, and they have guest speakers coming from outside AMWA to give specialized talks about this. But some topics like predatory journals are really something to be aware of, and we've issued a statement making people aware of it and how to recognize such kind of journals online.
Okay, perfect. So it's definitely worth checking out the EMWA website. Also check out the LinkedIn group. We try to share the web links, but it's also an easy Google search. You'll find it. And so we learned networking is really important. You can also connect with Abe, maybe on LinkedIn if you like.
Yeah, definitely.
If you have any further questions. And we thank you very much for all the insightful information.
Oh, you're very welcome.
And we hope it helped you a little bit, and maybe you see some of the people who joined today as future colleagues in medical writing.
Yeah, great. I would enjoy it. Yeah, great.
All right. Goodbye, everyone. Have a good afternoon and evening, and we see you soon with our next webinar. Bye.
Bye.